Okay.
Okay, we've all heard that. So now I'd like to introduce Carol Young, who I worked with for many years at Lexmark when we were together in the enterprise architecture group. And that group has now moved off into different areas and doing different things. And one of the areas that Carol uh, worked on specifically was dealing with the digital twin, which was something that was just being developed when left Lexmark, retired, and have since unretired, of course. But as we go forward here, I just want to turn this over to Carol and let her do the presentation. I'm going to turn off my video because nobody needs to see me. And I'm going to turn off my microphone as well. But if anybody has any questions during the course of this, that's fine. Please let Carol know and unmute yourselves when you do that. And we'll, of course, as we're recording this, it'll be put out on our YouTubes going forward. So Carol, over to you.
All right. Well, just real quick about me. I've been at Lexmark for 32 years. It's hard to believe, but and I had 4 years of experience before that in software development. Most of my career has been spent on the application side, kind of 1 foot in the business, 1 foot in the technical, kind of the bridge between the two. Just what I like. I like to understand what the solution we were working on has to do with reality. So I was always interested in how the business was using our solutions, but I also like the technical side because it's challenging and it's always something new. And I've spent a lot of time in data warehousing, early on with data warehousing, and now that's all changed, and that's kind of where I am now. I'm back to that, not really by choice, but just necessity. It's where I was the most needed. But I've spent some time in process management, process improvement, the technical side of that. Early on in the early 2000s, I spent a couple of years working on process management and the practice, setting that up, and that kind of fell to the wayside a while. And then recently, we started working in that area again, but with a different slant on it. We now call it the enterprise digital twin. So let me go into my slides, get away from talking about me. So when we talk about the enterprise digital twin, I want to talk about some concepts because there's a lot of different definitions for digital twins. Our definition really is somewhat different than a lot of companies. So I want to talk about that, and then talk about how we're focusing on the EDT, as we like to use acronyms. So we lovingly call it the EDT. And then talk about how our enterprise architects benefit from an EDT. And then most recently, Lexmark has started developing a new product called the Optera IoT platform. And so I'll talk about how we're using the EDT with that platform. And then we're also, our vision is to use EDT as an Optera IoT platform offering. And I'll talk about that at the end. So talking about concepts. So we have a definition of enterprise digital twin, and I think this is unique to Lexmark. I don't think anyone else defines it exactly the way we do. And we've struggled with it a little bit because there is a different connotation for digital twin. So it can be confusing to people that have been exposed to digital twins for other companies. But that's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the definition. And you can read that definition, but I want to focus on the pieces of it, especially the holistic and living knowledge base terms. Holistic is referring to the fact that it's not just business processes. It's business processes and all the things that make up and support those processes. So it's the data, it's the infrastructure, it's the applications, it's the capabilities that business process supports. So it's a broad range. It's really everything we do. The EDT encompasses that. And then the living part of it, so we store the EDT in a tool called InSpy. InSpy has some out of the box objects that we leverage, and then we've helped them mature their product, and we've created some new ones, and that's being refined all the time. What it was, we really kind of taken a back. This is kind of taking a backseat to a lot of other things we're doing right now, but hopefully we'll get back to it sometime in the near future. It's always in the back of a few of our minds that we need to get back on this as soon as we've got the bandwidth for it. But as you all understand, sometimes business priorities take over and keep you from doing some of those fun things you want to do. But hopefully we'll get back to that. Let me go to the next slide. So not only, do we have a definition of EDT, we also developed a methodology that includes the tools, standards, methods, and governance. The tools being, as I mentioned, InSpy, and InSpy actually works with ServiceNow. ServiceNow actually has the back-end database that InSpy leverages. And so we build our models in InSpy, but the data is actually stored in some of the ServiceNow tables, but there's also InSpy tables as well, but they all work together. And then we've created model templates that we ask our process and data and technical architects to leverage. As far as standards, the framework for the EDT is based on TOGAF, and our business processes fit into the ABQC framework. We also have defined naming conventions that we use so that we're not calling things different names, which is really common when you have business folks and technical folks leveraging the same tools and objects. And then we have a standardization for our processes with really the priority there is to minimize the process variation, if not eliminate it as much as possible. But sometimes that's not possible, especially when you're a global company like Lexmark. And then our EDT team has spent a great amount of time developing training, and they do a wonderful job. I think they've trained probably the majority of people at Lexmark, and they've also done a really good job of documenting their standards and tools and governance processes. And as far as, so not just on the tools, but also on how to use the standards, what the governance processes are. So, I mean, really the full gamut. I think I just really give kudos to them. They've done a wonderful job and made the training like understandable for folks. I've been through it once, and I think they just have done a great job. I can't say that enough. And then governance. So we review the models that others are creating just to make sure they're following the standards that we have and using the right naming conventions or reusing objects as appropriate. And then this is one of those slides I was talking about that's kind of hard to read, but really what this is showing, and I apologize, my allergies are in overdrive this evening. What this is showing is that our EDT is based on the TOGAF framework for enterprise architecture, which means it encompasses, all the different areas, such as the business architecture, data architecture, technology architecture, and each one of those has its own set of objects. Business processes consist of processes, activities, workflows, tasks, actors, whereas the technology, is your networking, your security, your application, or your not so much your applications, but your servers, all those technical components. And this way everything is tied together, but you also have all the details that are needed for each one of these areas, because they're all really different, but they all have to work together. So any questions on the concepts before I go to the next section? Get a little drink.
And when we get the slides, it'll be easier for us to read what you had there, but there's a lot of detail that's associated with each one of those sections.
Yeah, and I will also mention now, and I will have a link at the end of the presentation. We, 4 of us at Lexmark, did separate webinars for InSpy, and those are out on InSpy's website, and I have a link to that. And we went into much more detail than what I'll go through this evening. So
yeah, and those were great. Those were great webinars.
They were. Mine was just an overview, so I won't take credit for the greatness, but the other ones were very detailed, actually go into InSpy, and I think you'll get a lot of value out of those. So I'll have that link in the presentation. So next I want to talk about how Lexmark is using the EDT primarily. So there's an EDT group, and they really focus on business processes. And they also, they dip into the other areas as well, but that's primarily their focus, is to document and maintain and improve Lexmark's business processes. So the challenge they were faced with was how to leverage the features in InSpy and create a process framework that worked for the business without creating a bunch of artifacts that were created once and never used again and were out of date a week from when they created them, which was a big amount of work and a big challenge for them. But using InSpy and those out of the box objects that we have, and then also like I said, we created some custom ones as well, using the APQC framework, and then leveraging one of the tools within InSpy called FreeLucy to relate the different objects together. So relating the business processes to the data and the systems through FreeLucy. They've had quite a bit of success. I will say that the relationship to the systems is not as strong as the business process objects themselves and the models themselves, simply because they had a great big challenge without having to do that as well. And there's still some features that InSpy is working on that will make that easier, and hopefully in the near future they're actually rewriting InSpy. So I'm hoping with that new release that they're going to offer a lot of features that's going to help us be able to put our models, our different architectures together, process architecture, our data architecture, et cetera. So we still have room to improve there. So this is just a few slides that I took from the training that the EDT team has, and they've really broken down the process architecture and gotten into the specifics of how you define those components. So when you talk about a process activity, it describes what the business needs to do, and then we've got listed here just more information about what a process activity is and what it's not, to help the business process architect know what it takes to create a process activity. And then questions to ask when you're creating those. Why are we performing this activity? What is done when this activity is performed? What triggers it? Is there any technology needed for the activity? So again, kudos to the team. They really, I think, get into the details that helps the process architects create their models. And, it's really, it's hard, I think. I mean, it's, unless you know exactly what a process activity is, it can be confusing. And at what level, is a process activity. So they've done some really good work to make that more precise and understandable. And then, how does that process activity fit into our framework? How does it fit into APQC? So we start, at that level of value stream, APQC, business capability. And anytime we create a new process activity, we link it to these levels. So, because if there's not a level that it belongs in, it's probably not a process we should be working on, or maybe, we don't usually make any changes to this framework, but it does happen. These frameworks were created, they've been around for a long time, and, business activities are not new. They're pretty much the same, but, sometimes things change, and, we have new technologies that gives us the ability to offer new features. But generally, our process activities will fit into these frameworks. And then I like how, they have related the process components to a story. So if you think of words as being activities, and then you combine those words into sentences, or those activities into sub-processes. And just like you combine sentences into paragraphs, you combine those sub-processes into processes. And then lastly, your paragraphs make up your stories, and in a similar way, your processes make up your value streams. And then if you go the other way, words are made up of letters, activities, there's tasks that make up your activities. And then at the very lowest level, when you're performing a task, there's a set of instructions that you use. What are the steps? What are the screens you go to in an application, etc. So the process activities describe what works to be done. And then the process workflows describe how the work is done. And those workflows consist of a bunch of, or a sequence of tasks that are performed by actors. So you can see how we drill down. So as we were talking about, the value streams and processes down to activities, now we're going to a lower level of tasks that actors perform. And then, as was mentioned on the previous slide, those tasks would have a set of instructions to provide the actors, so they know exactly what they need to do for each one of those tasks. And that's what I was just talking about. So I've already covered that. So what we have then is a business framework where your value streams that contain processes and sub-processes describe what we do, and then the activities within those processes and the tasks within the activities and the standard work instructions define how we do the work. And that's just a little piece of how the EDT trains the process architects on how to do their process modeling. And as I mentioned, there is a webinar that was created by Kevin Playforth, who has been doing process management for a long time, and he's very, very good and very articulate. And so I would encourage you to watch that video. He goes into InSpy. I think he goes into InSpy. I'm for sure he does. So you can get a little flavor of how that application works and helps us with our process management. Any questions on EDT within Lexmark? And like I said, that is really the focus currently. at Lexmark. Some of the other areas I'm talking, well, the other areas are different groups. I'll say it that way. It's probably the best way to say it. Any questions on that?
Well, I don't know if there are any questions, but APQC is the American Productivity and Quality Council, and they provide process classification frameworks that are generic, which is where we started at Lexmark, across all enterprises, encompassing 13 different business areas. They also do have industry-specific entities as well, so that people can go out and look at apqc.org and see what those process classification frameworks are.
Thank you for that, Eric. I was thinking of you today when I was reviewing my slides, and I thought Eric knows more about APQC than I do. So thank you for adding some information there.
No problem.
All right. Next area I'm going to talk about is how our enterprise architects use EDT. And this is where the slides get really hard to read. But just, what this is meant to show without, showing all the details is that, architects, look at these kind of diagrams all the time where there's the business has requirements, and we understand what those are, and then understand what data is needed to support the solutions, and what applications are involved, and how they generate and consume data, and then what the infrastructure underneath all that looks like, and then trying to relate all of that from infrastructure up through the business process is very difficult and very complicated. And not only that, so just understanding it's one thing, but when there's a problem and you're trying to diagnose a problem, if you don't have this kind of understanding, this kind of diagram, it's very difficult. And the other aspect of that is you may have a diagram, but if it's not been updated since the solution was put in, it's probably out of date because changes have been made, and processes have changed. The applications have had enhancements. So it's really critical to have up-to-date diagrams that show the current state when you're trying to diagnose problems or determine the impact of a change. So if you have a business process change, which applications are affected, what data is impacted, what infrastructure needs to change to support those business process change, and then vice versa. If you're changing out your servers, and I've lived through this before, actually, this is a story I'll tell from a long while back. We had our data center at Lexmark, and it was supported by Lexmark employees. And when we outsourced, we moved every server in that data center, and to understand what all used data or applications or whatever was on those servers was just a gigantic undertaking. We survived it, but if we had had an EDT that showed us all that linkage, it would have been much less painful than it was. It was very painful, actually, but it was a learning experience, like they all are. But so then the other aspect of how the EDT benefits architects. So there's different communities of use. So when we're working on a project or an implementation of a new application or an upgrade, whatever it is, if we start with the business process and we understand how that process is impacted in processes, then and we document that, we create models of that, then we have the basis for testing, because we're going to have our business users testing, and if we don't know what processes are impacted and how they're impacted, then it makes it really hard to test. But if you document those processes as part of your project or your implementation, then you have those test cases, you have the structure for those. It's just a matter of creating those in the tool that you have. and then linking those back to the processes that you created during your requirement sessions. And then you can also use that information for training, and it all links together. It's much easier said than done. It's a lot of work, but it does make for an easier implementation. We actually use this process in many different areas. I can't say it's perfect, but we try to stay with the structure and the idea of it. Sometimes we have to do what needs to be done, but we try, and it does make things just so much simpler, especially when it comes to testing and training. And then the EDT also gives us a common language to use. So, I've been a data architect, I've been a business architect, I've been an application architect, I've been almost all of these things. But when we're talking to other people that have those roles, we all use different language. And, if we have a common set of objects that we're all using, then the language becomes more similar, and there's not as much confusion or just missing of work that needs to be done because we're just not speaking the same language. And that happens a lot, especially when the business is talking to the technical folks. Happens all the time. But if we're using the same objects in our EDT, and their name the same, and people are aware of what they are, it really does make those conversations easier. It's not easy getting the language the same. Has anyone that's ever tried to get people to agree on naming of things can attest to how hard it can be. But once you get there, it's very useful. All right. Any questions on how our enterprise architects use the EDT? And I will say that many of our architects do use the EDT, not as connected to the business processes as we want to be, but again, that's something we're working on, and always trying to do better there. And hopefully, like I said, Inspire will provide some features that will make that process easier. The next thing I want to talk about is how we're using EDT in our Opera IoT platform. So Lexmark has 25 plus years experience managing printers for our customers. And in the process, we've learned a lot, and we're pretty good at what we do. So we went down this path of providing a platform to customers that have devices, not necessarily printers, but devices that generate data, that use some form of consumables. With printers, that's paper and toners and cartridges, etc. Not all devices have consumables, but many do. So we developed this platform, or this product rather, the Opera IoT, to help other customers have the success that we've had with our managed print services business. And there's really three components of that product. So there's a platform, and this is based on Azure components. So all the infrastructure and the databases and the storage and the networking and security. We have a defined platform that will support a customer who is sending IoT data from their devices and would like to report on that data and create predictive services and consumable services for those devices, or for the customers that have those devices. And then as part of the product, we have a suite of accelerators, which are pre-built blueprints that include dashboards. We have several dashboards that we have defined with all the information needed to populate those dashboards, how the metrics are calculated, et cetera, and algorithms for those predictive models that I mentioned, as well as business process templates. And then the last component of the product is consulting services, where we use our expertise to help other customers improve their business. And the way that EDT fits into that, on the platform side, when we go into a customer engagement, we have that architecture, that Azure architecture diagrammed. And when we start working with the customer, we start determining whether that infrastructure or that architecture will work in their case, or we need to modify it. For example, some customers that we've seen use a specific data warehouse like Snowflake, which isn't in our platform, but we may need to add it for a specific customer. So we use that Inspire platform model as the starting place to have discussions with the customer to understand what their platform needs to look like. And then on the accelerator side, we have business process templates that are modeled in Inspire. These are things like the device management process. So how the customer's devices talk to the platform, how they register their devices so that the devices can send data to our platform, and then information about the data that's coming through, how many devices are connected, what's the usage patterns, information like that, which of their devices are not connected or are creating errors. So we go in with those business process templates. And again, just similar to what we do with the platform architecture, we conduct workshops with the customer to determine how those processes need to work for them. Sometimes what we find is the customer's not nearly as mature as we are and not quite ready for the processes that we've built. So we start, so a lot of times we start with a simple process and then build a roadmap to get them to the point where their processes are more mature. And many times, that's just part of their journey. And that's part of the digital transformation that these customers are going through. And then on the other side, really, I think I've described the EDT methodology. So we use the methodology that we use in-house of creating those models, the technical models and the business process models, and then linking those together for a specific customer's requirements. Checking the time. And you can't read this, I'm sure, but this is just showing the business process, the device management process that we have built, that we start with the customer. And as I mentioned, we will have workshops where we take the customer's business folks through this process and understand, where it fits in their business and where it doesn't. And then our process architect will alter these models to be more specific for the customer that we're working with. And again, the process architect that generally works with our customers, he is the one that did the webinar. His name is Ted Perkovich, and he goes into more details and also goes into Inspire to show how he created these models and how we'll conduct those workshops and then create those specific models for our customers. This is just showing, again, as you saw in the EDT section, where we start with a business, with a process activity, and then we start drilling down into what's the workflows and what's the activities within those, or the tasks within the process activities, and basically just start drilling into the details of those processes and determining what the roles are, who the actors are. This gets into more of that, where we have the actors defined, and then also the technical components, because especially with the customers that we're working with, they may have SAP, but they may have Salesforce, or they may have D365 or some other ERP system. So getting that information from the customer and documenting it in these process workflows. All right. Any questions on our Optra OT product and how we use EDT? Okay. All right. This last section, this is our vision that we're still working on. So we leverage EDT in our Optra OT product, but a lot of it is manual. So what we're trying to get to, and we've made some attempts at this, and honestly, I think much of the problem is we've really not had enough time to focus on it. And it's a complicated, it's complex, and no one's really done this. So it's going to take some focused time, I think, to make this a reality. And this was something I worked on about a year ago, and I was really passionate about it, but then I got pulled off on other things and haven't gotten back to it. But I really want to see this work. So as we talked, there's all these relationships between the processes, the applications, the components within the applications, the business capability, etc. And much of those relationships has to be manually maintained, and that's a lot of work. And it not only is a lot of work. I mean, you can do it up front, but as I mentioned earlier, somewhere down the road, things have changed enough that it's really not even useful anymore. So keeping it up to date once you've created it in the first place is really hard. So what we're trying to do is, let me go back up here, is to, as much as possible, make these relationships automatic. And the reason we want to do that, this first bullet on requirements, really we are doing where we're using what we're calling the ODT, the Optra data, or Optra digital twin, which is specific to the Optra OT product. We really are leveraging the EDT to drive out the customer's business processes and define the processes for them, and then link those to the architecture. So we go in with the pre-built models, we refine those for the customer's requirements, and that's great. But what happens when we leave, because we don't generally support the solution. We may, there's multiple different options, but we may not. We may transfer knowledge over to the customer and they support it themselves. What we want to happen is that once we create the digital twin, the Optra digital twin, that the customer can use that for multiple things. For example, for support. So if something happens that there's a new component that's been installed on their Azure platform and it breaks a business process, rather than someone in their IT organization getting a call saying my business process is broken, we would we want to be able to, before that component is installed, know what it's going to impact, and to be able to do that, reasonably quickly. So having the ability to have that relationship between the models and the actual implementation is what we're working on. And ServiceNow has some of this capability where they are able to discover all the components that are installed in an Azure platform. But what they don't have is that linkage up to more of those logical models. For example, the business process. That's really hard to link your physical technical components up to a business process, because there just really is, I won't say no way. It's really hard to link those. There are ways to do it, and we were getting pretty close. So hopefully we'll get back on it soon. And basically what that would do is provide the linkages across our business architecture, our application, we call it neighborhoods, the application with all the components within that make up an application neighborhood, as well as the platform. So that is our vision, is to eventually get to that point where when we leave a customer, they have a model and the linkages to their platform to help them support the platform, and when they're making enhancements, to know what the impacts are going to be across their business architecture, their technical architecture, their data architecture, etc. And that's the last slide. This link that I have is the link to the webinars that I mentioned. And let me just see if I can go there. Yeah, so there's my overview, and then there's a solution architecture webinar, modeling for a doctor OT, and a process architecture. And I think you'll find these very useful. They're much more detailed. The speakers go into Inspire, like I mentioned. Actually, it looks like Ted even goes into Free Lucy. So I would encourage you to watch those webinars and learn even more about our EDT. Any questions? Comments?
Yeah. So Carol, thank you very much for this. Made a lot of progress in the 4 or 5 years since I've left Lexmark. We started this process at Lexmark, and Carol and Mark de Beaumont, who was one of the presenters there, were part of the original team, because we were looking at the difficulty of relating. If I have to change something, so this could be in a product, so think a printer or a motor or something of that nature, and if I have to swap something out, it's an expensive and difficult process to go through when you're doing it physically. So if we can mirror image in a digital fashion what we're trying to accomplish, it makes a lot of sense. It's a lot less expensive, and you probably don't damage anything when you're doing it digitally. And, one of the things that we ran through that got us started down this path is complex organization, right? We were in 150 countries, 55 offices around the world. And all of a sudden, you've got 10 different ways of someone describing what an order entry process is. It's impossible to make that work when you're trying to go across platforms. So being able to relate the business, the solutions, the needs of the applications, and going from there, this was a huge effort, and one that I think was very valuable. And now it's been able to be expanded and moved out into the Opera platform going forward. So kudos to you and the team for working on that and getting it through to where it is now. Steve or Terry, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make at this point? We'll make sure you get the presentation, and the recording will be out shortly. So I'll make sure that you get that so you can follow up on any of those types of things. But digital twin is the future for most of what we're trying to accomplish today.
I
Very
think this,
interesting.
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying it was very interesting.
Yeah, and you don't have to start off big. We started off with just a couple of things that we worked on, some specific processes that we were working through, especially in the managed print service area. That was something that was an important area to get started with, because I don't know what Lexmark has today, but back then they had over 1 million printers that reported data. Every time somebody turned it on, every time somebody printed a page, ran out of toner, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you had to have some way of being able to model that without having to actually physically touch the devices and deal with things. So it was a great learning experience for everybody. Steve, you had something you wanted to add?
I was just going to add to that and say, every time that we had a big project, a new CRM being implemented, or, whatever large project we were working on at the time, we would go into workshops and basically start from scratch.
Yep.
And find the person that knew the processes, and someone would get up on the whiteboard and sketch that out. And, you took like 3 weeks just to do that. And once you had those processes modeled, you gain those 3 weeks to really start, first level set, make sure the process is truly what the models tell you it is. That's always important. But we didn't start from scratch. We don't start from scratch anymore, and that makes a big difference. And every time we go through that process of reviewing the models and just making sure that everyone understands it, it really gets people to understand how important it is, and the common language and the methodology. And so it's, over time, it's really we've really seen an improvement in how we tackle these large projects that we have.
Yeah, so common language is a big one. The other one is you eliminate the proliferation of Visios and other diagrams out there that unfortunately are always out of date. And here you can keep these things more in tune. Steve, did you have something you wanted to say?
Say, this is a fascinating look at a topic I know very little about. It brings to mind the ownership transition we had at my employer fairly recently, where we had to migrate all our software applications, whatever, from the old owners' servers to the new owners' servers. And there was definitely pain involved in that. Sounds like a tool of this nature would have come in very useful.
Sure. Well, there's nothing like finding out what's going to break before it actually breaks, right?
Right.
That's a big one. So
there's nothing like finding out what's going to break as it's breaking, which
right.
is
and the period of time when Carol was talking about big changes. I mean, Lexmark went from 3 highly customized software applications to run ERPs. Essentially, they were highly customized JD Edwards to a single SAP instance worldwide. They replaced all CRMs with Microsoft Dynamics. They were going through a ton of other changes. I think in the 10 years I was at, or 13 years I was at Lexmark, we swapped out about 99% of the actual enterprise software. And every one of those projects had an issue with this until we started working on the concept of a digital twin. It was really it makes a huge difference. So I
won't say that we're perfect and we have it all figured out and everybody's on board, because that would be wrong, because it's not perfect and everyone isn't on board. But we've made great progress. It takes time, because I mean anything like this that's different and requires a lot of people to do the work and a lot of governance. It's hard to get buy-in. So we continue to work on that. But especially in the Opera OT product side, we have a little bit more leverage there, because it's a smaller group. And, it's something that when you say you do this, that gives you more credibility. So it's taken off more on the Opera side than it has. Well, I won't say that. It's different. It's actually different. Not more, just different, how we're using it within Lexmark and how we're using it with the Opera product. But we are leveraging it and have plenty of room to improve.
right? But frequently we find that it's always easier to sell something to a customer than it is to emulate those behaviors internally ourselves.
Yes, finding that out for sure.
My current employer, we tell customers that we sell them services and goods, and we're fast to market and so forth and so on, but we're currently trying to consolidate 31 companies into one and 17 different ERP systems.
Ugh.
And so it's, but we pretend somehow with our customers to be able to, that we have a unified back end, but in fact, we don't. So it's this type of thing that you're seeing here and what Steve just mentioned are critical. So
That's hard for me. This is the first time I really worked on customer engagements. So that's hard for me because I am very much a kind of black and white person. And if we say we do something, I feel like, we should be doing it. But I mean, I do understand it's all in maturity.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's a journey, definitely.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else tonight, I'm going to let everybody go with a whole 7 minutes back of your time. Carol, thank you very much. This was great. Personally, I enjoyed seeing the progress that's been made by my former employer and your current employer. And I think it was a wonderful thing. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all for
Thank you.